Putin is humiliated. He's absolutely distraught, I imagine, with what's going on in Kursk in the east of Ukraine. It's extremely embarrassing for him. 19 days his country has been invaded for. They were shocked because Russians never expected this to happen. They haven't been invaded since World War II. They had no anticipation of it, but they didn't fight back. There was almost no resistance from everyday people. There were mass surrenders with the military. There were 5 air raid sirens between 2 o'clock in the morning and 5 p.m. here today, which is more than normal because Putin's friend Modi has been in Ukraine for the last few days. And I think the reason it's been so quiet is because he's called off a lot of the strikes on cities like Odessa and Kyiv while he's here. Now that he's left, and now that it's Independence Day in Ukraine, which is symbolic, so there were munitions fired into Odessa today. One of them did land, and I know it did because you can smell in the air of a city when a missile lands in it. It smells like burning metal, and it lingers for a while, and I heard it, but I can't discuss where it landed because it was in a place of strategic importance.
Hello. So I'm here with Caolan Robertson. I'm not here. Caolan is in Ukraine, overlooking. Can we see the Black Sea again? You're overlooking the Black Sea. You're we can't see Crimea from there, can we?
You can't. Crimea will be exactly, basically there, behind where this wreckage is, and then over there is the direction of Kherson. You have Kherson that way, which is a 2-hour drive, 2.5-hour drive. The team went there on Wednesday, and then over there is Crimea and Sevastopol.
My goodness!
You can't see any of it.
And on the other side would be Transnistria.
Yes.
So
that will be.
So this is the bit that President Putin, in President Putin's almighty plan. This is the corridor that he wants, isn't it?
This is exactly the corridor he wants. This is why Odessa was part of the plan when he was taking Ukraine. They were going to go straight up through Kherson, and they were going to go through Mykolaiv, and then they were going to cut down the road to Odessa. I know that road because I've taken it from Odessa to Kherson in the past, but the Russian army was stopped at Mykolaiv, literally at the gates of Mykolaiv, and pushed back south of the river in Kherson back in 2022, and they've stayed there ever since, terrorizing the population of Kherson endlessly. Zarina, who I was with today, is a journalist, and she was there on Wednesday as well. Both of us are planning to go there over the next few weeks and do reports about drone attacks that are happening. The Russians have realized that actually they're running out of a lot of the type of munitions they've been using in the past, and now they're using little small drones, putting grenades on them and putting munitions on them, and they are crashing them into civilians, into aid workers, into police officers at random, constantly, multiple times a day in Kherson. There are videos coming out about it right now that are unbelievable. The Russians are posting these videos on Telegram and posting about it. And that's 2.5 hours over here, and it's absolutely disgraceful. So that's one of the things we'll be covering when we're here, is how they're treating the last few remaining civilians of Kherson, a city of 360,000 people reduced to less than 60 now because it has become so unlivable. The people that have stayed there are only there because they can't afford to leave, and it's almost every second building has been damaged. It's a besieged city basically.
Yes. So, and you have air raid sirens which could go off at any moment where you are at the moment, I think.
So, yeah, I arrived here in Odessa 5 days ago. Forever, I booked a one-way flight here, and I'm permanently located to Ukraine, and with a base in Odessa because it's close to where I can report from Kherson. But there were 5 air raid sirens between 2 o'clock in the morning and 5 p.m. here today, which is more than normal because Putin's friend Modi has been in Ukraine for the last few days. And I think the reason it's been so quiet is because he's called off a lot of the strikes on cities like Odessa and Kyiv while he's here. Now that he's left, and now that it's Independence Day in Ukraine, which is symbolic, it's a symbolic moment, and Putin loves his symbolism, and he loves to terrorize people on the days that they try and celebrate their life. So there were munitions fired into Odessa today. One of them did land, and I know it did because you can smell in the air of a city when a missile lands in it. It smells like burning metal, and it lingers for a while. And I heard it, but I can't discuss where it landed because it was in a place of strategic importance. Yeah, it's going to start continuing again now that his friend has left, and Putin is humiliated. He's absolutely distraught, I imagine, with what's going on in Kursk in the east of Ukraine. It's extremely embarrassing for him. 19 days his country has been invaded for, and so he's going to be throwing a lot of stuff and throwing a lot of tantrums into the cities
Well,
here.
tantrum certainly, but not very many soldiers, because he's running out of soldiers. He's running out of uniforms, and he's thrown conscripts. And are you aware? You are aware, aren't you, of the soldier exchange that took place this morning?
Yeah, so that's basically been part of the success story of the Kursk invasion, and it's great that Ukraine didn't ask the West for permission to do this because they would have been denied it. The West has been reluctant for Ukraine to actually win this for a while. They've been very slow to supply this country with the munitions they need and the permissions that they need, not just to use those munitions where they need to use them, but also with doing things like they did before, which is why it's good they didn't tell anyone about it. And the prisoner swap has been one of the really, really great parts of the Kursk strategy. There's a much wider strategy as to why this is happening, and the Kursk strategy is very interesting. And the next few months are going to be absolutely pivotal and critical for what happens to this country.
Are you allowed to say what you think that strategy is? Because you are in Odessa at the moment.
Not advisable if you're discussing specific strategies and to be talking about that, but it will be, I hope, a success story. And I hope that it will be nice to be visiting over here.
Yes, can I shift the subject, because I don't want to get into diplomatic or military trouble here. But I've got my own theories, and I'm sure you've got your own theories. But today is two anniversaries. It's the National Day for Ukraine. It's also the day in 1943 when the original Kursk battle began. I think I am right, and that was one of the biggest battles of World War II. I think it was the biggest battle ever.
It was certainly the largest tank battle ever. You had something like 4,000 tanks involved in that. It was one of the defining and definitive moments of World War II regarding Russia and Germany, and it happened in Kursk. This week is the anniversary of that battle. And what's more crazy is the tanks that were involved in the Battle of Kursk in 1941 were German tanks and there were Russian tanks. And some of the tanks that have been steaming across the checkpoints and borders into Kursk right now are German-made tanks. So there will be people who are around 80 or 90 years old that are still alive in Kerch that will be seeing those tanks and actually will be bringing memories of when they were children.
The people in Kursk, in the Kursk region, the Russians in the Kursk region, the report you're getting is that they've been treated quite well.
They're being treated very well. A friend of mine who's a journalist, Tom Much, was inside Kursk 2 days ago. And what he reported back to me was that, they were shocked because Russians never expected this to happen. They haven't been invaded since World War II. They had no anticipation of it, but they didn't fight back. When the Russians took Kherson and took cities here in the 3-day invasion, they were met with huge resistance from everyday Ukrainians, people throwing rocks and stones at tanks, people trying to sabotage them because Ukrainians don't want Russians in their country. What happened when the Ukrainians entered Russia was quite different. There was almost no resistance from everyday people. There were mass surrenders with the military, and the locals basically just wanted someone to look after them and someone else look after them, which the Ukrainians are doing right now. And it's quite amazing. But you also have the unbelievable humiliation for Putin. Unbelievable. 200,000 refugees heading south from Kursk right now, inside Russia, a country that can't look after, they can't even provide toilets for their citizens anyway, never mind refugees within their own country. So this is such a huge defeat for him. And his days are definitely numbered at this point.
Well, I think he's already dead, but that's we can have that discussion another day. But did you see the Telegram post of the grandmother cursing Putin in Kursk?
I did, and it didn't surprise me because a lot of
Not at all.
Russians. Pardon?
Yeah, it didn't surprise me either. I agree.
Yeah, well, because a lot of Russians hate living in Russia because it's a shithole, and it's a place without electricity and water in most of it. It's a place where Putin wants nothing for his citizens. If you look at the map of Russia at night from the satellites, you see, Moscow at the center, at the top of the crown, and it's lit up, and everything else around it gets darker and darker because he likes to have Moscow as the center where the castle is, where all the power is, and everyone else are sort of peasants surrounding them. That's how the culture operates in Russia. Fundamentally, you see the gap as well between Finland and Russia, and you see the lights being really bright. It's almost like North and South Korea. That's just how it is in Russia.
Yes, I'm afraid you've probably got the advantage over me. I lived in Moscow for many years, but I never left Moscow. I never even went up to St. Petersburg, sadly. So I think you probably know more about ordinary Russians outside Russia than I do. But I have many friends in Ukraine, and I was speaking to somebody this morning. So the question, and I didn't manage to get this answer from the person I was speaking to this morning. So I'm relying on you now. Is there any sense of celebration today in Odessa?
There's an incredible sense of celebration today. I'll turn the camera for a moment. There's a couple here taking a beautiful photograph together. There is people filling the beaches. There are people even swimming and playing in the sea, which is not advisable because it is full of sea mines and there are signs everywhere telling you not to do that. But people are sick of living in fear and they're just celebrating. It's actually a beautiful, let me see if I turn again. It's a beautiful sight to see here. It's stunning. People are celebrating everywhere. I saw 3 or 4 weddings today and a proposal. People walking around laughing and smiling because they've decided that they're no longer going to live in fear anymore, in the fear that Russia wants them to feel. And almost celebrating today is the act of resistance that everybody in the city can do and is doing, and it's completely overwhelming. It's amazing. It's something that even us in the West need to learn from,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was told this morning that that I'm living in a fantasy world, and that the area around Kyiv is safer than being in London. So I was put in my place, but I know missiles are falling with great regularity.
Well, Kyiv has an air defense system. It has the Patriot system. They don't have enough of those because it costs about $10,000 for Russians to send a small rubbish Shahed drone into Kyiv, and it costs about $1 million per missile to shoot them down. So they're running out of those and money. But Odessa and no other city in Ukraine has a Patriot system. The city is not defended by air except for manual machine guns shooting down drones by hand on the top of some of these buildings, which is quite noisy.
An extraordinary display of firepower. I really can't overstate that. I've really never seen anything quite like this. We saw tracers flying up into the sky from those anti-aircraft guns. We saw glows in the distance. We saw impacts in the sky appearing to cause explosions, and those objects, whether they're Shahed drones.
But that's the only system that exists here. So if the risk is higher, closer to Crimea, it's closer to the Russians. They hit Odessa more than Kyiv, but it's the safest place you can be in the south of Ukraine right now, which is why I'm based here.
Mm-hmm. And there's presumably quite a large, quite a vigorous civilian population thing with machine guns to get ready to shoot these missiles down as they come.
Well, the Ukrainian population has gone from 46 million to 22 million before and after the war. So it's half the number of people here. That's people dying and refugees leaving the country and going across the rest of the world. So, every city is half vacant. Kyiv is pretty full of people, but Kherson is, again, it's at a 10th capacity. This city is at about 50% capacity.
So are there people at night doing sort of air raid watches and all that sort of stuff, rather like the Blitz in London?
It looks identical to the Blitz in London. You can see it at night. They basically have a searchlight that points up a massive dot into the sky. It looks like the Batman light. And then they have guns which are very large that shoot bullets that are bright red. And you can see them going into the sky, and you can see the lasers and the lights chasing the drones and trying to catch them and shoot them out of the sky. And it looks like something from Star Wars meets World War II. It's very dramatic, it's very shocking, very loud, and it's quite unbelievable. Most cities, you look up into the sky and you see the stars. You look up here, you see the stars and bullets that are bright red flying across the sky as well, which is kind of totally unusual. But it's the best system they have right now, and they're very, very good at it. They've got extremely good at it, like the Blitz in London, and they stood on the rooftops and they were shooting at the planes, and they were kicking the flames off the top of St. Paul's. It's very similar here. Like everything here, it feels like World War II. You know, when the Berlin Wall fell, Europe stopped thinking that wars like this would happen. Land wars, physical, geographical land invasions. We thought the future was nuclear, and we thought that the future of war might have even ended. So we stopped making the type of munitions that Ukraine needs now, whereas Russia didn't. You know, there is equipment I have seen in this country on railway lines that is 80 years old, and it's, you know, Soviet era and World War II era equipment that's being brought back out again, dusted off, put into the field. It's so unbelievable.
But Russia can make quite a lot of tanks at the moment, but I think it's losing more tanks than it can make in a year.
It is. Well, the Russians have a lot of resources in what they could make, but they don't have any strategy, because everything in Russia is down to Putin. Putin likes to micromanage his troops in the West.
Yes,
and in
it's
better
the pyramidal
systems.
structure.
Yeah, exactly. So he micromanages and he looks at it. But Putin was never a military commander. Putin was a spy. That was his job when he was in the military.
He was a handbag
carrier.
I think, Caolan, you're dignifying him well beyond his level of competence when you call him a spy. He was the person who carried the handbag for the wives of spies when they came to visit Germany. That was his job.
Yeah. And this is the person who is advising where these tanks go, which is why the tanks are being wiped out the second they get into Ukraine. Whereas Ukraine is being advised not by one insane person, but by NATO's intelligence, European Union intelligence, and the Pentagon. Combined strategy of thousands of people.
And also, I must point out, President Zelensky is being advised by soldiers who have served on the front.
It's how you think about life as well. It's not just about your money or your might or your resources. It's your strategy, and it's how you think, and it's how you actually implement things. And it applies to everything in life, really, but it certainly applies to this war, because that's why the Russian army, which was feared across the world as one of the most terrifying, bulky, big, the military parades, has been completely failed and completely inept to do anything. It's been months, and they've gained centimeters in the east. They're still where they are, and they've been invaded in the north. I mean, it's like, and I think they're running out of resources. So, because the one thing that happens in a war that you do not tolerate, especially an offensive a war like Putin's raging, is an invasion. Is someone setting foot on your land? You know, that is the one thing, and people do everything you can to stop that within minutes, and every minute that goes by is more humiliating. It has been 20 days that Ukraine has occupied that land, and it still hasn't been taken back, which shows they're running out of resources massively, which is also probably why it's quieter today than I imagined in the skies of Ukraine.
Yes, the tropes that are coming out on YouTube and Instagram from the Prigozhin troll factories are suggesting that the Ukrainian troops in Kursk have been surrounded, but I think that's not true.
I think that's not true. I don't think they're going to get any further in Kursk right now, because the Russians have already built their new fallback line, and they're not going to be penetrated by the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians have sent the message, and they've done the thing that they needed to do for the next phase of this war, which will be very interesting. And I hope at the final phase of the war that I'll be able to cross this sea and be able to go on a nice vacation to Crimea over there. That will be a really nice ending to all of this.
Well, absolutely. But of course, Crimea was the vacation spot for the elite Russians as well. Now, let's just but you've also got the the Kerch, the Kerch bridge. It's so easy to get those two words mixed up, isn't it? Kerch and
Kursk bridge, yes.
Bridge, which
Well,
presumably would have to come down.
well, that bridge has been heavily damaged, which means the only thing that can get across it right now are pedestrian-sized vehicles. Those vehicles cannot carry water, they can't carry anything that heavy, they can't carry munitions, and more importantly, that bridge can no longer support freight vehicles, which means the soldiers, from what I've heard now, are relying on small 500 ml bottles of water per day, which doesn't work in the heat here, 35 degrees here. And they are, and the reason there's a water shortage isn't just because they aren't getting it in, it's because they blew that dam last year, and behind that dam was a reservoir that supplied Crimea with its water. That water is gone now. It's been washed into the Black Sea as well as half of Kherson. So that is going to be very interesting. And from what I've heard, Putin is probably taking a lot of the troops that he's using to go and take back Kursk from Crimea, which means Crimea will probably be quite empty at the moment. I imagine the hotels have a lot of vacancies at the moment, and there's quite a lot of people leaving. So that will be very interesting.
But Putin doesn't seem to remove the troops from around Zaporizhia, which is one of the assumptions here.
Yes, Zaporizhia is extremely strategic. Zaporizhia and Pokrovsk, which are both places I was in last year, are places that Putin is throwing everything he has at. And we know it's everything he has because there's nothing being used in Kursk. Those are extremely strategic. There's a ridge of cities that are called Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka, which are the fallback cities of Bakhmut that he has wanted for a very long time, and he's not getting anyone out of those areas. And unfortunately, the front line is actually moving in the wrong direction. And there's a city called Pokrovsk, which if I were to drive from here to Kramatorsk tomorrow, I would need to go through that city to get there. Otherwise, you have to go back. Otherwise, you've got to go over the top of Kharkiv. And that means that those roads are supply line routes from the rest of Europe and from Moldova to the east. And they're about to take those roads, I think. If you look at the deep state maps, it's pretty concerning. But again, it's very slow. They're going through half a field a day. That's how much progress they're making. And it won't define what happens next with the war, but it's sad, it's concerning, it's not something Putin's going to budge on. He's not moving any soldiers out of there.
But, so in other words, Putin is being quite defiant. He would rather lose Russian territory than cede any advantage in Ukraine.
Well, it's all about symbolism for Putin. Putin doesn't really care that much about land or anything like that. It's more about the cities, it's the symbols, it's why he likes to hit this place on anniversaries, it's why everything is timed with his feelings on those things. So yes, and also, I mean, the difficulty is the land around Zaporizhia and the land around Bakhmut is so heavily fortified and mined. It's going to take 500 years to demine them. There's hundreds of thousands of mines, and with our best technology, it's not even going to work. So even if the soldiers were to pull out of those areas, it would be very difficult for Ukraine to advance into them without some very good technology. And the technology is getting better. There are new types of drones that have just been created that have heat sensors in them that can basically fly over an area that mines and ignite those mines and show where they are. So there's interesting technology, but it's going to be very hard to get anywhere near.
And the news here is that the Putin propaganda is suggesting that Ukraine is attacking the Kursk nuclear power station, but that presumably is to deflect from the fact that Putin is further attacking the Zaporizhia station.
Yeah, Ukraine does not hurt its own people. Ukraine is not going to be setting off nuclear anything anywhere that it's not the way of this country. And if anything like that happens, it will be Russians doing it and blaming Ukraine and using it for strategy, because one country, Russia, doesn't care about its people. If an entire region goes radioactive and a bunch of Russians dies, Putin isn't going to care. But Zelensky would never radiate a part of this country or anywhere near that. It's a completely opposite strategy. The propaganda works because our news feeds are filled with Russian stooges and Americans that should be arrested that are paid by the Kremlin to tweet shit like that out, but they're not arrested because we have weak governments.
Yeah. So one last question, and then maybe we need to start another another feed and a slightly different topic. But the last question is: what do you think are the prospects for diplomacy now with Zelensky's advance?
I don't know. I don't think that Zelensky is going to concede any of the land that Russia has got hold of, because what that would do is it's not just about land either, it's about people. There are millions of Ukrainians living under Russian occupation right now, and to concede that land would confine those millions of Ukrainians to torture, death, murder, kidnapping, children being brainwashed and taken to Russia in the way that we saw when they occupied the cities here for a year. And Zelensky isn't going to let that happen to his people, and he shouldn't, not an inch. Because again, this isn't about fields of corn and wheat fields. This is about millions of human beings being murdered and genocided if they have to stay in those places. And that's what Zelensky's trying to stop, and that's what the rhetoric should be centered around more. So I don't think there's any room for diplomacy. I don't think Putin is rational enough to pull back on what he's done. And it's not the Russian way to be diplomatic. It's the Russian way to blow everything up around you and to fuck everyone. That's the Russian way, not diplomacy. So I can't see Putin doing any of that.
So you can't see anything ending very soon. This is
no, I don't think there's
forever.
any route to diplomacy. No, not at all. I mean, Modi's here and he was in Moscow. That's got nothing to do with diplomacy. That's just a PR stunt for India. That's not. There isn't a route to that. The route to diplomacy ended when Putin tried to take over the country and kill everyone. So that's over, and it's nice to think that we all want peace. I want peace. Everyone wants peace, but peace is not confining millions of people to genocide. That's not peace.
Yes, I entirely agree. Right, we now need to switch topics, I think.